They appeared among us without any warning whatsoever, almost as if by stealth. There wasn't any flourish as they entered. They came uniquely unheralded. Their arrival was singularly unannounced. Their influence completely unexpected. And yet the indelible impact that they have had on our lives is once and forever undeniable. But they did not appear suddenly. The nature of their mission forbade such an entrance. They first had to pay their dues, and that they did. They spent long, lonely hours in dark corners of dimly lit libraries, surrounded by mountains of dusty and old volumes. Or they sat quietly all alone at a kitchen table in the early morning hours of the day, as the sun began to peek over their shoulders and glisten off of the pages of the book that commanded their undivided attention. Or they struggled to hold with one hand the reins of the mule that they deftly guided down an Alabama farm row, as they simultaneously immersed themselves in the precepts contained in that holy book, the Bible, that they grasped tightly yet lovingly with the other hand. Times were tough, pleasures few, rewards faded and distant. But they did not waver. They did not falter. And they did not fail. Rather, they persevered. They recommitted. And ultimately, they succeeded. Their dedication and determination endeared them to us forever. We revered them not because of who they were, but because of who they served. They put their noses to that proverbial grindstone. They willingly paid the price. They sacrificed much, and never once did they look back. When the fullness of time had come, they stepped forward out of the shadows of relative obscurity to become our teachers, our mentors, our schoolmasters. They loved us, they taught us, they admonished us. They were then, they are now, and they forever shall be our unsung heroes. Their names and their lives are legendary among us. See if you recognize them. Gus Nichols, Franklin Camp, Guy N. Woods, Foy E. Wallace Jr., A.G. Freed, Rex A. Turner Sr., Adrian Doran, J.W. McGarvey, B.C. Goodpasture, G.K. Wallace, and so many others who have gone on to their heavenly reward. And some, thankfully, who have not. Men such as our own beloved 90-year-old Hugo McCord, Avon Malone, William Woodson, Alan Hires, and others whom time forbids me to mention from this platform this evening. They asked little, and they gave much. We owe them still more. Their knowledge of God's Word and their willingness to impart that knowledge to us place them in a position of preeminence that they neither sought nor solicited. But once in that position, they showed themselves to be truly workmen who, handling aright the Word of God, needed not to be ashamed. We, sitting at their feet and absorbing their knowledge, came to realize something of inestimable importance. We had in our very midst men who were real, genuine, legitimate treasures to our great brotherhood. They were precious resources, priceless founts of knowledge, from whom all, great or small, young or old, could freely and cheerfully draw. We esteemed them highly and loved them dearly. But then we realized they were not alone. Out of the shadows of that same relative obscurity stepped another group of men, precious treasures in their own right, who had spent long hours in dimly lit libraries, yes, but who also had spent countless days and weeks and months and years in research laboratories. These men were scientists, trained not just in God's Word, but in God's world as well. Boldly, they joined hands with the men, the likes of whom I have just mentioned, to open up to us and our great brotherhood not just the wonders of God's book of Scripture, but also the wonders of God's book of nature. They came in the form of men like the late Dr. H. Douglas Dean, who in the 1960s used his PhD degree in biology from the University of Alabama to stand firm and to refute the evolutionary teachings of an increasingly vocal group of humanists who wanted to steal the minds of our children and grandchildren. They came in the form of Dr. Russell C. Artist, who used his PhD in botany, gleaned from the University of Minnesota in 1937, to present lectures during the 60s and 70s on the literal historical nature of the Genesis account of creation for more than 2 decades, as he served as the chairman of the Department of Biology at David Lipscomb and as my personal mentor. These 2 men, likewise, were great treasures in our brotherhood. But once again, they were not alone. One greater than they in the fields of science had preceded them, and in so doing, had paved the way for them, for me, and for others yet unborn, so that we could follow in their footsteps. His name was Dr. Aaron Wesley Dykus. You probably know him better as the author of that beautiful and stirring song that has come to be known to so many in the churches of Christ simply as number 728B. And surely, if we in the church had a theme song, wouldn't this beloved hymn be it? Our God, He is alive. Dr. Dicus understood that. He wrote about it. He sang about it. He wanted us to sing about it. And who could have guessed that in the great long ago, in the days of yore, in 1888, when that tiny little boy was born in Festus, Missouri, that he would have become one of the United States' most famous scientists of his day? Who could have guessed that when he moved to Swayze, Missouri all those years ago and met a sweet young thing when he was 20 years old by the name of Bertha Jane, married her, and that same year baptized into Christ, that would put him on the road that would lead him to such preeminence in the field of physics that I would be standing here before you almost 30 years after his death to commemorate him, to applaud him, to remember him, and to be proud of him. He was a treasure. Our great brotherhood has been filled with those kinds of treasures. We owe them much. And they have asked so little. In 1929, Dr. Dicus finished a PhD degree in physics after having completed a bachelor's and a master's degree. And when he was just around 41 years old, he was offered something that was unheard of for a man that young, the chairmanship of the Department of Physics at the famed Tennessee Technological University in Cookeville, Tennessee, a position he accepted and filled with honor for almost 20 years. While he was at Tennessee Tech, he trained students in physics that would become the young men and young women who would occupy the positions of preeminence at the Oak Ridge National Laboratories near Knoxville, Tennessee. One of those students, Dr. Ray Kinslow, with whom I corresponded in preparing this lecture, and who very kindly and graciously gave me information that few could have access to, in our correspondence made this comment. He said, Dr. Dicus probably had more of his students at Oak Ridge than any other physics professor. I was one of them. After doing atomic research at Columbia University in New York, I came to Oak Ridge and hired probably more than half of his former students there, including one of his own sons. Dr. Dicus was well known among the federal government. He should be equally well known to people in America today. How did you get here this evening? Well, if you came as I did, you came in an automobile. And if you turned a corner and flipped the turn signal in your car, you should remember this man we're discussing because right before the Great Depression hit, he was the man who invented the turn signal. Something cars in Alabama do not have. Not to his memory, I might add. Dr. Dicus eventually left the position of his own choosing at Tennessee Tech as the chairman of the physics department and moved to Florida College to become the dean there, a position once again in which he served with great distinction until his retirement in roughly 1954 or thereafter. He was a prolific songwriter. He was a fairly prolific author. He authored several books entitled Sermon Outlines, a commentary on Hebrews and Romans, and a book on church leadership. He wrote more than 35 songs, among which, of course, was the topic of our lesson tonight. Our God, He is alive. He continued to write beautiful, beautiful songs, including Lord, I Believe. Died on September the 2nd, 1978, at roughly 90 years of age, having lived a full, distinguished, and profitable life as a great, great treasure to our brotherhood. And it was important to him that we all know that, in fact, that God of whom he sang and that we serve is very much alive. Friedrich Nietzsche in the great long ago said with some pride that God is dead. I have news for you tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Nietzsche is dead. God is very much alive. And the evidence for that existence is all around us. The song that Dr. Dicus wrote and that we sing so humbly today and so reverentially should remind us of that evidence. All around us we see the evidence of this God in nature, as well as in His book, the Bible. I'd like to discuss with you this evening some of that evidence, because I honestly believe that in this day and age that evidence is needed, oh, so very badly. When atheism and agnosticism and infidelity are ripe and rampant, I think there has never been a better time for us to stand forward and to proclaim that, in fact, we have the evidence to show from both science and the Bible that our God is indeed very much alive. He's not ill, He's not ailing, and He certainly has not died. His sovereign power and complete control still reigns, and He still sits on that great white throne in the city set four square. What more evidence could we want than to simply take a look around us? When the psalmist said, chapter 19, verse 1, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth His handiwork." Oh, indeed, how correct that psalmist was. From the microcosm that Dr. Dicus studied in the physics laboratory to the macrocosm that we see through the eyes of the Hubble telescope, the evidence and the power of that God are absolutely overwhelming to the unbiased mind. Folks, the evidence screams from every corner of this universe. And if you think that perchance only those of us who already believe in God's Word, who do obeisance to that Word, are the ones who have seen it, you are sadly and sorely mistaken. In this day and age, that concept that Dr. Dean fought so long, that concept to which Dr. Artis devoted his entire existence in fighting, that neo-Darwinian Jericho is crumbling and falling around us because of this kind of evidence. Take a look at some of the statements of some of the men who have literally written the books on evolution, the men who have literally developed the theories. For example, if I were to mention to you this evening the name of Sir Fred Hoyle, some of you in here would recognize immediately that name. Dr. Hoyle only died about 3.5 months ago, knighted by the Queen of England for his scientific achievements in establishing what came to be known as the theory of continuous creation, or the steady state theory. If you're in this auditorium tonight and you're over the age of 30, and I notice some of you certainly are, you were taught in public schools, as I was, the steady state theory of the origin of the universe. Dr. Hoyle is the man who developed and invented that theory. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, the beloved monarch of England. He's the man who mockingly gave the name to the theory that replaced that theory. One day on one of his radio programs, he referred to it simply as the Big Bang. And the name stuck. But his conclusion before he died? Dr. Hoyle said a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. Folks, this is a man who was one of the foremost evolutionists in the world. Certainly without peer, the preeminent astrophysicist on the planet. And Dr. Hoyle said, from the evidence that we see, it appears to us as if a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics. Dr. Dicus would have loved that statement. That he's also monkeyed with the chemistry and he's monkeyed with the biology, and that there is absolutely no way. He says the evidence is overwhelming. That you just can't have blind forces producing the order that you see around us. Ladies and gentlemen, why do you think that years ago, when Dr. Carl Sagan, the late eminent evolutionist of Cornell University, published his multi-part public television series, Cosmos, and the book by the same title, why do you think Dr. Sagan chose that one word? Why didn't he call it chaos? The exact opposite of the Greek word for cosmos. Cosmos is the Greek word for order. It's literally the exact opposite of the Greek word chaos. Why did Dr. Sagan call that series to try to teach our children and grandchildren that there is no God and that everything evolved out of chaos? Cosmos. Well, who could understand that better than the ladies in this auditorium this evening? You have a good, hard sleep, and you get up in the morning, and you look in the mirror, and you see chaos. But you apply cosmetics. Sorry, that's the only example I could think of. To bring it into order. Folks, you think we're the only ones that see in this great cosmos the order and the beauty and the grandeur and the structure? What was it the psalmist said, chapter 14, verse 1? The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. That's strong language, isn't it, to call a man a fool? Why would the Holy Spirit have directed the psalmist to employ that terminology? I'll tell you why, folks. Because it would be foolish indeed to look at the evidence around you and still come to the conclusion that there is no God. Again, one has to almost purposely ignore the evidence to get around it. Dr. Hoyle went on to make this comment in his book, Evolution from Space. He said, once we see, however, that the probability of life originating at random is so utterly minuscule as to make the random concept absurd, it seems sensible to think that the favorable properties of physics upon which life depends are in every respect deliberate. It is almost inevitable, says Dr. Hoyle, that our own measure of intelligence must reflect in a valid way the higher intelligences, even to the extreme idealized limit of God. I happened to be in Great Britain giving a series of lectures when he made that comment. The English newspapers had 6-inch tall letters on front page editions, morning and evening, that said literally, "Scientist says there must be a God." I heard a radio interview with Dr. Hoyle. The interviewer was incredulous. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He said, "Dr. Hoyle, you're the one who has been knighted by our own queen for having shown us one of the evolutionary origin of the universe theories. And you think there may be a God?" Dr. Hoyle's response was withering. He did not blink, he did not stutter, he did not stammer. He said, "Sir, let me put it to you this way. I, because of the evidence I have seen, am now actively searching for the guiding hand of the Creator." Folks, what in the world do you think is out there that is evidence of that import? Evidence that is so strong it could make a man of Dr. Hoyle's stature do a complete about-face and say, it looks as though we may have gotten here by the hand of God. You think Dr. Hoyle's alone? You think he's some kind of lone wolf crying in the wilderness? He is not. Dr. Hoyle is being joined by an ever-impressive chorus of people who share his own views regarding the origin of our universe and the origin of humans in that universe. Dr. Paul Davies, the renowned Australian-British astrophysicist, says there is, for me, powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. Folks, Dr. Davies is an evolutionist, an atheist. He doesn't hold any of the views that you and I hold regarding God or His Word or creation. And yet all of a sudden, seeping into his writings keep coming these overtones. The impression of design is overwhelming. It's almost as if somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers. Haven't we always and forever taught our children, you never get a painting without a painter, you don't get a law without a lawgiver, you never get a poem without a poet, and you do not get design without a designer. Friends, we're not the only one who's picking up on that. When William Paley, the British theologian, wrote that book all those many years ago on natural theology, and he said if you were out in the middle of an English heath and you looked down and you stumbled across, lo and behold, there in the middle of the path, a watch. And you looked at that watch and it had on it a crystal. It had tiny hands and intricate springs, and it was keeping perfect time. Could you not justifiably conclude that there must have been a watchmaker? Friends, Paul said, Romans chapter 1, verses 20 and 21, the invisible things of God since the creation of the world are clearly seen, being perceived through the things that are made, even His everlasting power and divinity, that they may be without excuse. Friends, you mark it down. There isn't going to be anybody, not a soul, who's rational and sane, that stands before the judgment bar of God in that great day yet to come, shrugs their shoulders with calculated indifference, and just says in the face of Jehovah, I'm sorry, I just didn't have any evidence that you existed. That isn't going to happen. And in fact, folks, some of these people are getting awfully close to it even now. Dr. George Greenstein, an eminent physicist in this country, says, as we survey all the evidence, the thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency, or rather agency, capital A, must be involved. Is it possible, he says, that suddenly, without intending to, we have stumbled upon scientific proof of the existence of a supreme being? Was it God who stepped in and so providentially crafted the cosmos for our benefit? Look at the questions they're asking. Folks, what do you think is out there that's making them ask these kinds of questions? Look at this statement from NASA astronomer Dr. John O'Keefe. Dr. O'Keefe admitted, he said, we are, by astronomical standards, a pampered, a cosseted, a cherished group of creatures. If the universe had not been made with the most exacting precision, we could never have come into existence. It is my view that these circumstances indicate the universe was created for man to live in. Who created it? Who's the super intellect that monkeyed with the physics, the chemistry, the biology? Who is it that formed this impression of design that is so overwhelming? Who is doing all this? A number of years ago, there were two scientists, Drs. Barrow and Tipler, both atheists, that wrote a book that caused ripples all across science. It was called The Cosmological Anthropic Principle. Some of you may have heard of it. Here we back are to that cosmos thing. The order. Cosmological, order. Anthropic, from the Greek word anthropos, meaning man. You know what their book's 608 pages. Do you know what it said? The universe has so much order in it. It looks as though it was made just for man. They said their conclusion was the universe seems to have known we were coming. That was 1986. I want to show you a quote from the book that Dr. Tipler authored 8 years later. Dr. Tipler said, when I began my career as a cosmologist some 20 years ago, a cosmologist, the guy that studies the order of the universe, he says, I was a convinced atheist. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that I would one day be writing a book purporting to show that the central claims of Judeo-Christian theology are in fact true, that these claims are straightforward deductions of the laws of physics as we now understand them. I have been forced into these conclusions by the inexorable logic of my own special branch of physics. What is his special branch of physics? Cosmology. The study of the order of the universe. An atheist who looked at nothing but the scientific evidence and said, I just can't go with atheism anymore. The evidence just is too irrefutable that there had to have been something or someone behind this. Take a look at this statement. Dr. Michael Denton, PhD, MD, molecular biochemist of Australia, in his book, 1998, Nature's Destiny, Dr. Denton, as an evolutionist, says, whether one accepts or rejects the design hypothesis, there is no avoiding the conclusion that the world looks as if it has been tailored for life. It appears to have been designed. All reality appears to be a vast, coherent, teleological whole with life and mankind as its purpose and goal. Folks, since when does nature have goals? Since when does nature have purpose? What is the purpose out there that every day the cockroach is thinking about? Or for that matter, the horse or the cow or the dog or the sheep or the pig. They don't have purpose. He says everywhere we go in nature, we're beginning to see that this thing has got purpose. It's got design. Some super intellect has monkeyed with this thing. This universe knew we were coming. Yes, it did. Friends, why? Because it was tailor-made, and we know the tailor. That God who is alive. Ask yourself this. What do you think is the evidence these men are seeing? Ask yourself this question, folks. Where did this universe come from? It's here. That fact is irrefutable. How did it get here? Well, you've only got three options, and these men are well aware of that. Take a look at the three options very quickly. Number one, maybe the universe is just eternal. It's just forever been here. It's always going to be here. It is simply eternal. Or maybe it's not. But one thing about it, if it's not eternal for whatever reason, there's one thing you do know. It then, by definition, had to have a beginning of some kind. Well, if it's not eternal, maybe this is where it came from. Maybe the universe simply created itself out of nothing. There was a point in the distant past where there was absolutely nothing but nothingness, and out of sheer, complete, utter nothingness, the universe just popped into existence of its own accord from absolute nothingness. Or maybe it didn't. Folks, if it isn't eternal and it didn't create itself, you know what the only remaining conclusion is. Maybe it was created by something or someone that's both anterior to, that is, exists before, and superior to, that is, greater than the universe itself. Name for me a fourth option. There is no fourth option. That's it. You can put subheadings under each one of those, but ladies and gentlemen, that is it. Either the universe is eternal, it has always and forever been here, or it hasn't. If it hasn't, then it had to have created itself out of nothing. If that's not the case, something or someone outside the universe must have created it. Guess what, Dr. Hoyle? Guess what, Dr. Denton? Guess what, Dr. Davies? Guess what, Dr. O'Keefe? Guess what, Dr. Greenstein? Guess what all these guys are beginning to figure out? Guess what they know? The same thing Dr. Dicus would know if he were alive today. The first two of those we know today scientifically are wrong. Let me show you what I'm talking about very quickly. Dr. Hoyle has now passed away. So has Dr. Sagan, December of 1996, incurable bone cancer. there's no probably about it, the man in this country today who is the most esteemed, the preeminent astrophysicist in the United States is a man, some of whom I'm sure you'll recognize his name because you've read his books. His name is Dr. Robert Jastrow. Dr. Jastrow is the founder and the former director of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies at NASA, currently the director of the Mount Wilson Observatory. He has more degrees earned and honorary than you could put on all these walls. He's highly esteemed, a brilliant scientist, a scholar of the first class, and every bit an agnostic. In fact, when he wrote several years ago these two books, God and the Astronomers, and Until the Sun Dies, in the opening passage, he told the reader, and therefore I want to tell you to be fair to him and to you, in matters concerning religion, he is a devoted and committed agnostic. He does not believe in God. Knowing that, look at his statement. Dr. Jastrow says, most remarkable of all is the fact that in science, as in the Bible, the world begins with an act of creation. Oh, and he admits that view hasn't always been held by scientists. Only as a result of the most recent discoveries can we say with a fair degree of confidence the world has not existed forever. It began abruptly, without apparent cause, in a blinding event that defies scientific description. It did what, Dr. Jastrow? It began without a cause. Folks, you get a scientist talking about something happening without a cause and you mark it down, he has left science behind forever. The fundamental law of all of science is the law of causality. For every single effect, there is a cause. No, that's not it. For every single effect, there is an adequate antecedent cause. Folks, the book didn't fall off the table because the mosquito lighted on it. That's not an adequate cause. The river didn't turn muddy because the frog jumped in. That is not an adequate cause. For every single effect you see or know about, there is not only an adequate cause, but an antecedent cause. It is absolutely incredibly stupid to speak of an effect with no cause, or an effect preceding the cause. Those things don't happen. It's axiomatic that if you've got an effect, the cause preceded it. Well, Dr. Jastrow, what does that tell you? You've got no cause. You've got a universe that had a beginning. What's the only conclusion you can draw? Let him tell you. He says the lingering decline predicted by astronomers for the end of the world. That's his reference to everything just slowly running down under the edict of what we call in physics the second law of thermodynamics. Things are running down. He says, well, that's a whole lot different from the explosive conditions these scientists have calculated for its birth. That's his reference to the so-called Big Bang theory. He says it doesn't matter. The impact is the same. Dr. Jastrow, tell the audience tonight, what is that impact? Modern science denies an eternal existence of the universe, either in the past or in the future. Friends, you mark it down tonight. You will not find within 1,000,000 miles of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex any scientist who's kept up with the literature for the last 20 years who will try to look you in the face and honestly tell you this universe is eternal. We know it's not. It had a beginning, it's running down, it's going to have an ending, at least in theory, scientifically. Tell me something. Name two qualities that an eternal entity does not possess. It doesn't have a beginning, and it doesn't have an ending. Why? Because it's eternal. The universe, says Dr. Jastrow, had a beginning, it's going to have an ending, and in the middle it's running down. Name for me something an eternal entity doesn't do. It doesn't ever run down. Why? Because it's eternal. That first option, that the universe is eternal, throw it out. We in science have. What about that second option? A moment ago when I mentioned it to you that, well, the universe just popped into existence of its own accord out of nothing, I saw some of you chuckle. I can't say that I blame you. If somebody stood before me and told me the whole universe that you see around you today at an estimated 12 to 15 billion light years in diameter, containing all the galaxies and all the stars and all the solar systems that you see around you just popped into existence out of nothing of its own accord, I would chuckle too. But folks, when option number one was thrown out, That only left you two options. One of which was the universe was created. What's the implication behind that? There's a creator. You mark it down tonight, friends, there are going to be some people who are not going to go for that option. It doesn't matter what the evidence says. You want an example? Shortly before he died in 1992, Dr. Isaac Asimov was serving as the president of the American Humanist Association. Dr. Asimov was no dummy. He held a PhD in biochemistry from Johns Hopkins and was the world's most prolific science writer ever to have lived. He wrote over 500 books during his lifetime, thousands of articles. Before his death, he was interviewed by Dr. Paul Kurtz, the editor of the Humanist magazine. Dr. Kurtz asked him, Isaac, do you believe in God? He said, nope. He said, can you prove there's no God? Dr. Asimov knew you can't prove a universal negative. You can't prove there's no God. What would you have to know to prove that there's no God? You'd have to know every single fact. Why? Because the one fact you did not know might be what? The fact of the existence of God. In order to prove there's no God, you'd have to be God. You'd have to be omniscient. Dr. Asimov was smart and knew it, but he knew he wasn't that smart. So when Dr. Kurtz asked him, can you prove there's no God, Isaac? He said, no. He said, then why don't you believe in God? And Dr. Asimov's response, which has been written down for history and preserved for posterity, was this: because I do not want to. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, I strongly disagree with his conclusion, and I highly commend him for his honesty. He was willing to lay his cards on the table and tell you, I've got a bias that will not let me believe in God. I'm not going to believe in God. It doesn't matter what evidence you've got, I'm not going to believe in God. Folks, if you don't believe in God, how did you get here? You don't have any option. You're stuck with it. Evolution, that's the only way. You've either come supernaturally or naturally into this world. There's no such thing in the middle as supernatural naturalism. Another axiom that needs no explaining, I suppose. If you didn't get here by supernaturalism, how'd you get here? Naturally. It doesn't matter how bad the concept may be. It doesn't matter how rotten evolution may be. It doesn't matter how much evidence is compiled against it and amassed against it. It's yours. You're stuck with it. Dr. Asimov, why didn't you want to believe in God? He never told us why. Some have. Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World. Mr. Huxley didn't beat around the bush. In an article entitled Confessions of a Professed Atheist, Huxley said this. He said, my contemporaries and I opted for meaninglessness because if we chose the other, it interfered with our sexual morality. Not much translation needed on that one, eh? Mr. Huxley, why didn't you choose to believe in God? Because if I do that, I can't act sexually immoral like I'm going to do and want to do. Folks, the simple fact is, if you throw that third option out, what are you left with? Only the second. It shouldn't surprise you then, should it? What happened? May 1984, Scientific American magazine. Two evolutionists, Drs. Guth and Steinhardt, set forth what they called, in an article titled, The Inflationary Universe, the very concept that we have just discussed. Take a look. They say from a historical point of view, probably the most revolutionary aspect of the inflationary model is the notion that all the matter and energy in the observable universe may have emerged from almost nothing. Wait, they're not through yet. They say the inflationary model of the universe provides a possible mechanism by which the observed universe could have evolved from an infinitesimal region. Wait, they're not through yet. They say, well, all right, it's just then tempting to go one step further and speculate that the entire universe evolved from literally nothing. Folks, let that sink in. Do you have any earthly idea the impact that's going to have in science? That the whole universe evolved from literally nothing? We have always and forever taught our children, we have ourselves been taught, we as scientists have taught our children and students in our classes, from nothing you always get. You know why we've taught that? Because it works in quantum physics just like it does your checkbook. You've got nothing. You're always going to have nothing. But all of a sudden now, along come these two guys and publish an article in Scientific American, and with just one fell swoop and a wave of the convenient scientific arm, they wipe out all the centuries of the work that Dr. Dicus and others like him have done. Or at least, they attempt to. When this thing was put out, there were scientific societies all over the world meeting about it. They had big convocations about it. The news media got into it. The news media, the popular scientific media, the scientific media, everybody was in on the frenzy. In fact, we don't know how they did it. But one of the magazines, popular science magazines no less, that you could buy off of the newsstand shelf back then, a magazine called Omni, scooped the interview with Dr. Guth. They published the whole thing. It went on for pages and pages and pages in their November 1988 edition, the cover of which you're seeing on the screen behind me. Look at the top right pink lettering. Alan Guth on the birth of new universes. I want to show you a piece of that interview. The interviewer came along and asked Dr. Guth, as a result of the Omni interview, this one question. The interviewer said, Dr. Guth, how big was this very early pre-inflation universe? Excuse me, but does anybody in here besides me see something wrong with the question? Folks, time out a minute. Suppose the lecture's over. We're standing back in the foyer. One of you sees me over there by the table where all the books are, and you decide you're just going to walk over and say something to me. So you start trucking right over to me, and the more that you get a little closer, you can't help but notice I'm standing over there by that book table like this. Well, you being the curious person that you are, you edge over a little closer till you're within eye shot, and you look over and you say, excuse me, Dr. Thompson, what have you got there? And I look up at you and say, literally nothing. And you say, how big is it? Which one of us are they going to cart off? It's not going to be me. I'm going to be the guy standing nose pressed up against the glass on the back window waving goodbye to you while they put you in a rubber room where you go blah, 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 all day long. What do you mean, how big is it? I just told you the universe, that the thing had literally nothing. You saw what Dr. Guth said. He said the universe came from literally nothing. And the reporter comes along and says, well, before that, how big was it? Dr. Guth's printed response, it was amazingly small. In fact, says Dr. Guth, it was so small it was 10 to the minus 24 centimeters across. He knows you're not going to know what that means. So he's going to put it in words that maybe you can a little more easily grasp. In other words, he says this whole thing, the whole known universe, everything in it, every plant, every person, every pew, everything was packed down to it was the size of a single proton. And just as amazing, says Dr. Guth, is this, it would have contained only about 25 pounds of matter. Time out again. Lecture's over. We're in the foyer. I'm by the book table. You decide you're going to walk over and shake my hand just to be a gentleman or a lady. So you walk over, you extend your hand, but instead of me being a gentleman and shaking your hand, before you can blink, I reach around behind my leg where you can't see I've got it stored. I grab a ball-peen hammer that weighs exactly 25 pounds and smack you up the side of the head with it. When that ambulance pulls up out front, and they load you into that gurney, and they roll you down to the emergency room, and what are you going to do? Look up and go, it's okay, doc. He hit me with 25 pounds of literally nothing. I don't think so. And folks, the point is facetious, but yet at the same time very serious. 25 pounds is not literally nothing, is it? Anybody see what's happened here? We've gone full circle. We're right back where we started, aren't we? Dr. Guth, it doesn't matter to me if it's got 25 pounds of matter. Sir, respectfully, it doesn't matter to me if it's got 25 ounces or 0.00025 nanograms. Where did that matter come from? Is it eternal? Did it spring into existence out of nothing, or was it created? Friends, in philosophy, it's called begging the question. You just assume what you're supposed to set out to prove. You go merrily on your way as if you prove something, pat yourself on the back, and hope nobody notices. I've got news for you. Somebody's noticed. We're not going to let him get by with this. And by the way, you don't think a man of his eminent stature knows that there's a rat in the woodpile somewhere? Yes, as a matter of fact, he does. In an interview several years later, Dr. Guth said this. First of all, I will say that at the purely technical level, inflation does not explain how the universe arose from nothing. Inflation itself takes a very small universe and creates from it a very big universe, but inflation by itself does not explain where that very small universe came from. No kidding. Well, Dr. Guth, where did it come from? That's the whole question before us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Where did the universe come from? Dr. Guth, tell the audience, where did it come from? Prove to this audience that it came from nothing of its own accord. It just sprang into being. It inflated itself from nothing. Prove that to these people, Dr. Guth. I dare you. Prove it. Dr. Guth said in the end, I must admit that questions of plausibility are not logically determinable and depend somewhat upon intuition. Could I translate that for you? That means, put into the vernacular in Texas, I couldn't prove this to you if my life depended on it, but I sure hope this is what happened. Folks, that's the nice thing about living in this country. Land of the free, mother, Chevrolet, apple pie. You can believe anything you want. It's a free country. You can believe that Elvis Presley is still alive and eating fried banana and cheese sandwiches down in the Bermuda Triangle if you want. But you cannot teach that to our children as science. Why? Because science, by its very definition, built upon the foundation of the 5 empirical senses. If you can hear it or smell it or taste it or touch it or see it, then science can deal with it. Science doesn't deal with intuition. This is a happy hunch. It's an I hope so pie in the sky by and by kind of thrill that Dr. Guth wants to be right, hopes is true, but couldn't prove to you if his life depended on it. And it probably isn't going to shock you then when I tell you tonight, is it? The inflationary theory was thrown out. But while that was going on, his cohort, Dr. Steinhardt, began to work with Dr. Lind, a Russian scientist, and they developed what came to be known as the new inflationary model. Folks, this thing isn't going down easily. There's no gently into the night here for this thing. This is the last struggling hold that they've got something to grab a hold of. It's not going gently into the night. Anybody in here ever heard of Dr. Stephen Hawking? British astrophysicist. He's got Lou Gehrig's disease. If you've ever seen a picture of him, he's in a wheelchair. He can't move a single part of his body. They say his mind is more brilliant than Einstein and Newton combined. All he does as Lucasian professor is think every day. When he could move one part of his body, he could move his little finger. They attached an electrode type thing to it where he could hit the keys of a computer. He wrote a whole book called A Brief History of Time, translated into 27 languages, sold in over 8 million copies to date. Look at what Dr. Hawking said in the book. He said the new inflationary model, it was a good attempt to explain why the universe is the way it is. In my personal opinion, the new inflationary model is now dead as a scientific theory, although a lot of people do not seem to have heard of its demise and are still writing papers on it as if it were viable. Look at the date on the quote. Folks, that was 15 years ago. The new inflationary model was thrown out. But then Dr. Hawking began to work with Dr. Albrecht and several others, and they developed what came to be known as the chaotic eternal inflationary model. And so on and so on. Friends, it doesn't matter what name you give it. The problem still remains the same. How are you going to get a universe this size to spring into existence from absolute nothingness? You know what they say happened at the Big Bang? That all that was there were, at the very best, a few elemental atoms of hydrogen and maybe one or two of helium. That was it. That was it. And from all of that, we get this. As one scientist put it, if that's true, we're forced to the inexorable conclusion that hydrogen becomes an odorless, invisible, colorless, tasteless gas that, given enough time, turns into people. You want to see what really is going on? Take a look at what these two scientists wrote in a later edition of Scientific American. They say, we simply do not know our cosmic origins. Intriguing alternatives abound, but none yet compels. We do not know the details of inflation, nor what came before, nor the nature of the dark, unseen material, nor the nature of the repulsive forces that dilute gravity. The book of the cosmos is still open. Note carefully, they say. We no longer see the Big Bang as a direct solution. Inflation erases evidence of space, time, and matter. The beginning, if any, is still unread. Look at the date on it. February 2001 issue of Scientific American. And their conclusion? We simply do not know our cosmic origins. Yes, we do. And friends, it all goes right back to that very song that forms the basis of this lecture tonight, and that is, Our God, He is alive. Where did this universe come from? Take a look. I suggest to you tonight that it is a self-evident truth that from nothing you always get nothing. That is absolutely what the first law of thermodynamics says. The first law says you may neither create nor destroy energy or matter in nature. Friends, if you can't create it and you don't have any, what are you forever going to have? Nothing. You don't have nothing. Look around you. Even the atheist admits the universe is here. Where did it come from? It's not eternal. It couldn't have created itself out of nothing. We've already established those two don't work. Where did it come from? Folks, if something's here now, something has to have existed forever. The only question is, what is that something? If I were to put it into a logical format, this is what it would look like. Everything we know to exist, you can put into one of two categories. Matter, remember that includes energy. As you probably know, under certain of the laws of physics, they're interchangeable on occasion. And mind. Matter, mind. Do you realize how hard it's going to be to find someone who disagrees with you on that? Think about it. They heard what you said with their ears, or they saw what you signed with your fingers, both of which are made out of matter. They understood what you said because they've got a mind that allows them to do so. If they disagree with you, they either don't exist or they're insane. Everything we know to exist, you can put it in one of two categories. Matter, which includes energy, or mind. Now, years ago, the evolutionists, they knew where this was going, just like you've probably already figured out. They didn't like that. They weren't going there. So in an effort to get around it, you know what they did? They tried this old hack. They said, well, the mind is nothing but a function of the brain. The brain is nothing but matter, therefore matter's all that exists. It was a brilliant attempt. You know what doomed it? The work of one of their own. The British physiologist Sir John Eccles, E-C-C-L-E-S. Dr. Eccles came along. He was the world expert in the neural synapses within the brain. Those little spaces between the nerve endings where the chemical and electrical charges shoot over that make you do everything you do. Lift your arm, put your foot down. Let me tell you something. He worked on those things his whole adult career. Now let me ask you, if you got up every day and you had your tea and crumpets and went down to the lab, tea and crumpets, went to the lab, worked on the brain, worked on the brain, worked on the brain, worked on the brain, do you think that during that 40-year distinguished career, one day it might occur to you to ask, I wonder if the brain and the mind are the same? Think that might come up? It did for Dr. Eccles. But he just didn't think about it. He set out to perform one of the most amazing and complicated series of scientific experiments ever to come down the pike. Wrote a big, thick, 600-page book called The Self and Its Brain, co-authored with the eminent philosopher of science of Great Britain, Sir Karl Popper. You know what their research showed? Dr. Eccles attached electrodes to the minds of his subjects. the neural synapses completely quiescent. No electrical or chemical activity. While the mind was at work. It could be fired by mere intention alone to do something without any discernible electrical or chemical charge in the brain occurring, indicating the mind and the brain were completely separate entities. Just like a librarian is to a library, folks. The librarian may inhabit the library, control the library, use the library. The librarian is not the library. The mind may inhabit the brain, control the brain, use the brain. The mind is not the brain. The former isn't reducible to the latter. For his research on those neural synapses, Dr. Eccles produced that book. The single volume cost $250. And if you were to go home tonight and you couldn't get to sleep, counting those sheep didn't do it, I'd recommend this book. It's a real yawner. But only because it's so extremely, incredibly complicated. But the last chapter where he gives you his conclusions is worth a priceless amount. And there was one other group that understood it. Somebody in Sweden, where the king of that country granted to him the Nobel Prize. He's real hard to argue with on this point. Something is eternal. Matter or mind, that's all we know to exist. But folks, you know what's not eternal. It's not the matter. I've shown you that tonight. What is eternal? Mind. Call it whatever you want. Throughout all of history, it's gone by any number of names. It's been called mind, force, spirit, first cause, uncaused. We simply prefer to call it God. And you think we're the only ones that have stumbled across? Oh, no. No. Sir Arthur Eddington, the eminent British astronomer who only died a few short years ago, right before he died, made this comment. Look at it. It's astonishing. He says the idea of a universal mind, or look at the word he uses, or logos, would be, I think, a fairly plausible inference from the present state of scientific theory. Dr. Eddington, Sir Eddington, you think that you could infer from the evidence around you there must be a universal mind behind this? Oh, absolutely. He says the scientific evidence drives you right to it. Dr. Jastrow, what do you think? Dr. Jastrow said that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Bingo. Folks, you can't get around it anymore. You want to know how overwhelming that evidence really is? Look at how Dr. Jastrow ended one of those two books he wrote as an agnostic. He said, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. Gus Nichols, Foy Wallace, Guyan Woods, B.C. Goodpasture, the theologians who joined hands with those other men, Dr. Dean, Dr. Artis, Dr. Dykus. And what did they come across? Something it takes the agnostic years and books to figure out. And still, he won't act on that knowledge. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. Brethren, stop tonight and look around you. Do you have any earthly idea the evidence that you're sitting on? This universe, the size of it is so incredible we can only stand in utter awe. 15 billion light years in diameter. If you could travel at the speed of light, 186,317.2 miles per second, it would take you 15 billion years at the speed of light to go just from one end of it to the other. Do you have any idea what we're talking about here? Do you have any idea how colossal this thing is? Folks, the cause is always greater than the effect. You never have an effect that's qualitatively superior to or quantitatively greater than the cause. Never. If this thing is this big, how big does that tell you the cause was? Look at the intelligence this thing contains. Look at the intelligence inside every one of you. Folks, the effect is never greater than the cause. If this universe is here, if it shows this kind of intelligence, what does that tell you about the cause? The cause is infinitely bigger. The cause is infinitely more intelligent. Do you have any earthly idea the size of this thing and the intricate design that's stuck to it? We go through life and we just don't give it much consideration. Abraham Lincoln once said, I can understand how a man could walk by, keep his eyes to the ground, never give God a thought. How he could lift his eyes to the starry heavens above and say God does not exist, I don't have a clue. What did he mean by that? Folks, what he meant by that was this. Not only is this thing gargantuan, not only is it humongous, it is intricately designed. That super intellect Dr. Hoyle talked about did an amazing job on this thing. Let me prove it to you. Do you realize that while I'm standing here talking to you, this earth is rotating on its axis at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator? And while all that's going on, the earth is moving around the sun in an elliptical orbit at 600,000 miles an hour or 19 miles a second. While that's going on, the sun with its solar system is whirling through space in an orbit so colossal, it travels at 600,000 miles an hour, and it still takes 225 million years to complete one orbit. You're talking about a universe that contains over 1 billion other known galaxies, according to what Dr. Sagan said before he died. 25 sextillion stars we've already documented. That's a 25 with 21 zeros stuck behind it. If you're spinning on a ball at 1,000 miles an hour, whirling around a flaming ball at 600,000 miles an hour, moving through space at 220,000 miles an hour, folks, how in the world is it you never ran into anything? Just by accident? You realize this ball we call the Earth is 93 million miles from the sun? That thing is burning at 20 million degrees Celsius at its internal temperatures. It puts out more light to the Earth than all the other stars combined. We're 93 million miles. Somebody says, well, change that just a little. Okay, change it just 10%. Move the Earth in just 10% closer to the sun or back 10%. You know what that would happen? Folks, you move this planet just 10% in closer to the sun, it would bathe this planet with so much intense UV light, our ozone layer couldn't handle it. It would bake this planet to a crisp. Oh, somebody says we don't want that. Let's move it back just 10%. Folks, the oxygen level in your atmosphere is 21%. You move this thing back, that thing will begin to turn to ice. You won't have enough heat to keep this planet alive. You'll freeze to death. It happens to be 93 million miles, which happens to be just right. What about your moon? 240,000 miles away from you it is, which happens, by the way, to be just right. Move it in just a fourth or a fifth. You do that, you move this planet closer to the moon or the moon closer to us by a fourth of a fifth or fifth every, that's just 50,000 miles. Not once but twice a day you'll have 35 to 50 foot high tidal waves. Oh, somebody says we don't want to do that. Let's move it. Folks, if you begin to tinker with this, you lose control of the oceans, you do all kinds of things to this planet that nobody could live on. This thing has 21% in the oxygen in the atmosphere, which is just right for us to live. An atmospheric pressure at sea level of 14.7 pounds per square inch, just perfect for us to live. This thing has exactly the right weight, exactly the right mass, exactly the right tilt on its axis, 23.5 degrees. You don't like that? Straighten it up. You do that, the water will quickly move to the You'll have vast deserts in the middle. It's exactly 23.5 degrees, which happens to be just right. Right mass, right weight, right tilt, right distance from the sun, right distance from the moon. Maybe I should tell you where I got all these facts and figures. I got them from an intriguing article written by the physicist Dr. John Gribben in Science Digest. His article was titled, Earth's Lucky Break. Well, can you beat that? We just happen to have the right atmospheric pressure, the right weight, the right tilt, the right mass, everything, and it's just Earth's lucky break, as if Earth got in some roll of the cosmic dice 2 6s. Folks, who in their right mind could believe that these kinds of things just happen? These men can't. They've tried it. They've struggled over it. They're attempting to figure out a way around it, to do everything they can to get around the fact that our God, He is alive, and they can't do it. And you know why? Because when they wake up in the mirror, they see the same exact thing you do. I'm often asked, especially by young people, this one question. I'll give a lecture to them on some scientific object or some scientific thing, and they'll come up to me afterwards and they'll tug on my coat and say, Mister, don't you have training in science? Yeah. Didn't you get degrees in science? Yeah. Don't you practice? Yeah. And you still believe in a God? And I have one standard answer. I believe in God because of my science, not in spite of it. Lord Kelvin, the most eminent thermodynamicist ever to walk this planet, said if an honest man studies in science long enough, it will force him to believe in God. Why? When that little kid asks, why, mister? Why do you believe in God? I still have one standard answer. I believe in God because of you. What do you mean? He says, because of me. Mister, I ask a legitimate question. I'd like a legitimate answer. Why do you believe in that? That's a legitimate answer. I believe in God because of you. Do you have any earthly idea, kid, what you're composed of, how you're made up, the design that's inherent in this physical system you call a body? You're made up of over 200 bones, 206 to be exact. When you get to be an adult, one of them will be huge. The femur in the male thigh, thing goes over 20 inches long. Or the little tiny pisiform bone in the hand of the man that's half the size of an English pea. Those bones, 206 of them. 29 skull bones, 29 spinal vertebrae, 24 ribs, 26 other bones, 2 pelvic girdle bones, all spread throughout the body. And yet they all work together, jointly fitted. And you don't have to carry a can of WD-40 around in your back pocket to lubricate them. Because they're all forming their own lubrication automatically, instantaneously, every minute of every day, just as if somebody had designed it that way. Those bones form the structure for your muscular system. Over 600 muscles plastered onto those bones. And by the way, folks, those bones can do something our best made steel can't do. You break one of those bones, put it back together, it'll heal like it was stronger than it was before. We've never invented the steel that can heal itself, much less stronger. These bones can and do. Those 600 muscles, fortunately for you, they're put on not one but 2 independent systems, voluntary and involuntary. The voluntary system you've got a lot of control over. Tonight when I get through with this, you're going to go, he wore me flat out. I'm going home and I'm hitting the refrigerator. And you're going to open it up and you're going to find there's that leftover lasagna, which you're going to heat up, and there's a little salad left, and you're going to have a piece of chocolate cream pie. There's only one left. You'll take care of that. And you're going to sit down, and you're going to put it on. You don't worry about it. You've got the bones to do all that with, the muscles to control the refrigerator, the fork moving back. Try stopping a kidney. Can't do that, can you? You know why? The kidney's controlled, as are many other organs, by the involuntary system over which you have no control. Good thing for you. If that weren't the case, folks, you know what would happen? Every minute of every day you'd have to be going up diaphragm, down diaphragm, up diaphragm, down diaphragm. But it's all taken care of for you automatically, just as if somebody had planned it that way. Oh, and by the way, over those 600 muscles, that's skin. An amazing, amazing structure. The largest organ of the body, the skin. Never more than 3/16 of an inch thick. Human eyelid, 1/500th of an inch thick. A radiator and a retainer of heat. It works with the hypothalamus gland of the brain. You don't even know it. Right now, some of you are a little warm because there's a lot of us in here. You know what's happening? without you knowing it. The hypothalamus gland of the brain, one part of it, has kicked on. It's the most accurate thermostat we've ever found. It alerts the body you're overheating. So without you knowing what's happening, the pores are instructed to all open bigger. The arteries are instructed to move from the dermal to the epidermal layer of the skin, where that heat that they're generating through the blood flowing through them can be pushed out those open pores. There are over 2,000 sweat glands body-wide that can be activated in an emergency that can produce over 3 gallons of sweat every 24 hours. It's the most effective, efficient cooling system man has ever seen. Every air conditioning you've ever seen has been based on this human body. You cool down too rapidly, the reverse takes place without you ever knowing it. The other hypothalamus gland kicks on. It alerts the system it's beginning to cool down too rapidly. The pores are instructed to shut. All the sweat glands are shut off. The arteries are moved back down to the dermal layer where the heat they're generating can be captured by the body to warm itself back up. Are you aware of the fact the human body, when it's totally without clothing, is only 25% less insulated than when it has clothes on? An incredible system. And yet I'm to be convinced all this just happened by accident? Folks, that circulatory system inside your body, you call a heart, artery, you know what's going on? That blood's being pumped to that giant aorta, down into the arteries, down into the arterioles, and finally down into the capillaries. Little things in the tip of your fingers, the ends of your toes, they're 1/3,000th of an inch thick. Takes 10 of them to equal the thickness of a single human hair. They're so tiny, the blood cells that are erythrocytes with the blood in them and the oxygen have to go through single file. You know why? Because there in those capillaries, the last little bit of oxygen is squeezed out of the blood. That deoxygenated blood is dumped back into the venules, to go back to the veins, go back to the heart, go back to the lungs, and the whole thing takes 1 minute. You have 60,000 to 100,000 miles of blood vessels, arteries, and arterioles in your system, longer than any single United States railroad. And once every hour, the blood is automatically shunted to one of the 2 kidneys. They weigh about 2.2 pounds each. They have over 1 million filtering tubules in each one of them. The kidney takes that blood, filters all the garbage out that the blood has picked up as it makes its way around the body, dumps the pure blood back into the system, and all of it starts all over again. But in the 1 minute I've been talking to you, out of the 120 trillion cells that make up your body, 3 billion of them just died. But that's all right, because 3 billion happened to have just been born. Think of it as a giant garage sale going on all over your body. But folks, when you check into that cell, you've stumbled into something that is so incredible. We stand in utter awe of it. There's not a scientist alive who doesn't. I don't care what view he takes on religion. Inside that human cell, there are 120 trillion of them make up your body, over 30 different kinds of cells in a human. Red blood cells live 120 days. White blood cells, the little leukocytes that fight your disease, they live about 2 weeks. Spine cells, nerves, they live over 100 years. Long as you are, they are. Platelets, little cells that help the blood to clot, 4 days. Everything designed just right to fit exactly where it's supposed to go. But you stumble inside that cell. You've crossed a membrane that's 6/100ths to 8/100ths of a micrometer thick, 4 atoms thick. Yet it allows selective transport into the cell of what ought to go in, out of the cell what ought to go out. And when you hit the inside of that cell in that cytoplasmic matrix, there are over 20 different chemical reactions going on at a single time. When the cell's working in proper order, not a one of them disagreeing with the other. There are all those organelles found within that little tiny cell. There's the ribosome that's making the proteins that patch up your body when you damage it. Golgi bodies, they come along and package up the proteins and carry them away for the ribosomes. The endoplasmic reticulum, the communications network between the cell and within the cell. Then, of course, there's the nucleus. And you know what's in the nucleus. Surely I don't have to stand before an audience in this day and age and explain to you what happened on June the 26th of 2000. The then President of the United States of America stood in a joint news conference broadcast worldwide beside the British Prime Minister, a bevy of the world's most brilliant scientists at their side, to announce that we have cracked the code, the human genome. Dr. Francis Collins, the head of the NIH program that is in charge of the Human Genome Project, announced, we have opened God's book of life. And what we saw was so humbling. We were startled. Science and Nature magazines, the official organs of the British Association of the Advancement of Science for Nature and for Science, the American Association of the Advancement of Science, produced special issues containing the mapped code. When I got that thing in my office, I took the special insert, like in a National Geographic it was, spread it out. Folks, it would go from this podium to halfway out that aisle. Over 3 billion base pairs in every single cell. 30,000 documented genes. Some of which code for up to 100 different proteins. Your brown hair, your blonde hair. Your attached earlobes, your unattached earlobes. Your blue eyes, your green eyes. Your ability to roll your tongue or your inability to roll your tongue. Everything you've got genetically is found within those genes. Think about it. Folks, everything you are put into a system, the size of which is so incredible. The largest cell of the human body is the female egg, and it's only 1/100th of a micrometer. Some of the cells of the human body are so tiny, you could take a male sperm cell, put 20,000 of them inside a standard capital O on a typewriter. But you take one of those tiny sperm cells, link it with that egg, and you get an entire new human. If you go home tonight and get on your computer, you save something to your hard drive, to a floppy disk, to a zip drive, to a CD. How do we store all that material? Magnetically. We can build Cray supercomputers that fill this room. They can do over 1 billion calculations in a second. But every shred of information is stored there magnetically. Every piece of the human genome that is so complicated, the scientists who investigate it said if they tried to type it out into a set of Encyclopedia Britannicas, it would fill a set of those encyclopedias 500 pages per volume, 1,000 volumes long from one of your cells. You're made up of 120 trillion of them. That cell, that material is coded biochemically with all of the wit and wisdom of the human race, with all the cumulative knowledge of humanity at our disposal, with computers that can do fractions of seconds and billions of calculations. We have never, ever been able to code something biochemically. The complexity of that genome makes the world's best supercomputer look like something a 3-year-old put together on a Saturday afternoon in the middle of a blinding rainstorm using Mattel building blocks. We can't even begin to touch it. If I took you to the National Institutes of Health to see their giant Cray computer and told you it just happened by accident, what would be your response? Yeah, you'd laugh in my face, turn around and walk off. And yet because some guy puts a PhD from Harvard behind his back, he gets the right to look at you in the face and tell you the human genome that has within it every single coded instruction for the human body just happened by accident and expect you to believe it. I do not believe it. I will not believe it. Because reason rebels against it. Because everywhere you look, from the microcosm to the macrocosm, the evidence of that God just screams at you. Folks, listen to me. If you walked out of this auditorium this evening and it weren't dark, it was 4 in the afternoon and a brilliant sky, and you happened to see out in the parking lot a group of folks, and all of them are huddled, and they're all doing this, looking up in the sky. And you go over and you join them and you look up, and there, written in the sky above Bedford and Fort Worth, it says, "Drink Coca-Cola." What would you say? Would you say, well, wow, while we were in there listening to that guy talk, time, chance, and naturally occurring forces came by and hit those clouds and there it is, drink Coca-Cola. Or would you more likely say, wow, while we were in there listening to that guy talk, even though we didn't see the plane or the Skyrider driving it, flying it, through the air he came, smoke billowing out the tail end of the plane, and the Skyrider wrote, "Drink Coca-Cola." Which is more, to ask is to answer, is it not? And friends, that's my point to you tonight. You didn't see, you didn't hear the Creator. All you saw was the message. That message is intricately inscribed in the most complicated biochemical code you can imagine within every single one of your cells. If you set foot on that island, remember Robinson Crusoe? And you saw those footprints in the sand, but you never saw Friday, would you still know that Friday did in fact exist? Oh yes. Why? Because you had the footprints in the sand. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And his footprints have been in that sand ever since. It is a fearful thing, said the Hebrew writer, to fall into the hands of that living God. Brethren, at some point in the future, every knee will bow. As long as there is a breath left in these feeble bodies, you and I have a choice. We may bow that knee humbly before his great throne, and we may praise him and worship him as the God who is alive. Or we may turn in stubborn rebellion and stiffen our necks and harden our hearts and walk away from his mercy and his grace and the gift that he gave us on that old rugged cross 2,000 years ago. But if we do so, it will be at our own peril. Every knee will bow. Dr. Dicus loved that God. He spent his life worshiping and serving him. I urge you tonight, make the same choice he made. Not because he made it, but because he made it correctly. And if we can help you, we stand ready to do so now, while together we stand and sing.